Just out of curiosity, was anybody here besides me there in 1964? One reason that I'm sorry that Adam isn't here. Adam was here at 64. He was in Atlantic City, working for CBS News as a young kid, and he was as a CBS reporter. He put Fannie Lou Hamer on television at that convention, in which African Americans, arguably for many people today, couldn't vote in the South almost entirely. Your dad was part of that whole fight. I remember I worked in a county in Mississippi where, under your father, that county was the first one to allow voting because of, you remember, John Doerr, who worked for your dad, who actually forced the courts to allow people to vote. But it's a different era, and from my standpoint, the experience of 1964, reading about 64, learning about civil rights movement made me think people should all have the right to be part of the political process. And so in 68, I was part of a campaign, both merging the Kennedy and McCarthy campaigns, where the two of those people won all the delegates to the convention. Hubert Humphrey didn't want a single delegate, so he became the nominee of the party. And so we changed the party reform. It's kind of improbably. We have here a delegate from Iowa, and I told him I was going to invoke Harold Hughes in this. I put together a commission chaired by Harold Hughes, who was then the governor of Iowa. I was a bit of a state, then more democratic state, but Harold Hughes chaired this commission. At this hotel, at 68, in that convention, in which a combination of the Kennedy, your dad isn't, of course, but at that convention, in a narrow vote, the party rules were changed. And we were inspired, those of us who helped to put this thing together, not just by 64, but by what happened in 1912 with Theodore Roosevelt and the creation of the presidential primary. And so from my own standpoint, I feel like history makes a difference. And then I went on to write a book about Theodore Roosevelt and the election of the president, the creation of the presidential primaries, discovered a lot of stuff I didn't know. But so I think history really does matter, and I think with this panel, I'd be interested to have that conversation about why history matters.
Look, I thought there's so many conventions we can talk about, and we're going to kind of hone in on 64 and 68. And I was thinking about, of all the ones I've looked at and written about, which one is undersung and has really mattered in history? And my answer is 1952, because of television. Up until then, even when the Korean War happened, Walter Cronkite was in tears because he didn't get to be one of the Edward R. Murrow boys and go to Korea on radio. Everything was still radio. News of TV in 1951 was WTOP in Washington in a closet where you would, I'm not exaggerating, a closet with one camera, 15-minute news sponsored by local Maryland hardware store. That was CBS's big imprint. 52, CBS brought cameras into the convention. And if you go back and look at footage, it's your only real filmed, extended footage of watching the smoke-filled rooms, the haggling of Eisenhower, Taft, Truman dropping out, and Adlai Stevenson. At that 52 convention, a young Walter Cronkite, unknown, made extra money on the side by teaching people how to look at a camera and how to apply makeup. John F. Kennedy took a course from Walter Cronkite on how to talk on TV. And do you know who didn't? Richard Nixon. Sam Rayburn took the course too. And from 52, it evolves to the point where they start becoming more about, almost infomercials for the party. They become a celebration. This will be freedom, and they'll have a theme of joy, freedom, and they'll write it out. Everything about a television audience kind of honed in mind.
But David, let me ask you this. Are those still pictures, which given, obviously not that one there, but are they ever wrong? Do the pictures ever give you an image of something? And David, Doug, maybe you could talk about that. Do they sometimes give you an image that's powerful, but doesn't really give you the whole picture?
Good. Yeah, I think so. I mean, in a case of like that picture with Senator Kennedy that really was his personality, and I think generally, I mean, my mission is trying to show people for who they are, but you can take away AI and Photoshop. I mean, the Russians were doing, early Photoshop, like by airbrushing people who were standing on the
But
Lenin
leaving
tomb
aside AI,
out of history.
leaving aside Photoshop and AI, are there pictures where you have the picture which is itself real, but it's not the real story?
Right, because you're taking photos at a fraction of a second, a 500th of a second, and so that is a true image of what happened in that little instant. And I think about this all the time, like part of my mission, and we talk about objective journalism and all that. I mean, we're not objective as humans. I mean, you see things through your own lenses. I mean, me literally through the camera, but yeah, pictures can definitely be misleading about somebody's character or a situation without, and all I'm saying is that we worry too much about enhancement, but I think to your point, just a real photo can sometimes tell the wrong story.
So one memory I have, and this is a family memory, is of that moment that Doug spoke about. 1964, there was enormous tension between my father and Johnson. Johnson saw my father as an enormous threat, and my father disliked him. Is that a good word? Maybe it should be stronger. And he thought he was loud, he thought he was a bully, he thought he was garish, he thought he was somebody who was not to be respected. And he gave that speech at the '64 convention, as Doug said, 22 minutes standing ovation. And Doug very sweetly said it was about my dad, but it wasn't about Daddy. It was about Jack. And it was so emotional to have all of those thousands of people just not letting him speak because they so loved his brother, who he loved so much in this. And what Johnson wanted to do at that convention was make sure that it wasn't about Daddy and it wasn't about Jack. So he, orchestrated the convention so that wouldn't happen, but it wasn't possible because that love was so strong. Daddy spoke about Jack in a way that also reflected his view of Johnson. He gave this quote from Shakespeare that says, I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like, when he shall die, take him and cut him into little stars, and he will make the heavens so bright, the heavens at night so bright that no one will pay attention to the garish sun.
Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, Romeo and Juliet. So, and that was about Johnson.
But one of the things we talked about in the last panel, which David was part of that, is in Milwaukee, was that we sometimes think we're living in the worst of times, and we weren't.
Right.
That things have been a certain way before. And maybe you could talk about that and what we can learn from history to put it today in context.
Well, our own times are not uniquely oppressive. That's what you learn about history. And now we're looking at, there are comparisons while we're sitting here, what will this be seen at? Is there an analogy to another time? Some people do talk about 1968 and Grant Park just across the street from us where, Tom Hayden and Randy Davis and Allen Ginsberg and...
By the way, I was in this hotel, and I was out there. We can talk about that later.
I've talked to you about that later. And then the tear gas went all the way up and hit Hubert Humphrey's suite in this hotel. It went up that. And journalists were being beat by the thugs of Mayor Daley's police. It's not me saying that the police was wrong. They created the situation. It's in all of the after what happened, over beefed up, over policed. And Daley was livid about Martin Luther King's earlier march of '68, and then even after King got killed, there were disruptions of the streets, so he was determined to put this kind of ironclad, and on journalism, the roughing up of Dan Rather on the floor there meant so much.